Hello everybody and welcome to One Piece Chapter 1019 review. A chapter that mainly revolves around Franky vs Sasaki, but we also get a big reveal in the form of Yamato's Devil Fruit. And so I'm glad that Oda has kept the reveals coming to make up for the lack of tension in this part of the arc. The cover of Shonen Jump shows Luffy wearing a uniform that represents the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, and recently one of the spacecrafts belonging to the agency was able to obtain some samples from an asteroid. And so the University of Tokyo is studying those samples to try and see if they can get a better picture of the history of the solar system. So history, solar system, I think it's pretty obvious that we will be getting some space exploration to a certain extent by the end of the series, probably via Enel and the Moons and his army of automata. We get a pretty strongly Jinbei-themed color spread because of the whale sharks and also because of Franky's hair and his shirt. His shirt says, "You can steer," which is Jinbei's role as a helmsman. Meanwhile, Nami looks like she's thinking about opening up an OnlyFans account, and then obviously Sanji looks like he'd be more than willing to become a subscriber. Also, I like how these are the same whale sharks that we saw back in Impel Down. This chapter really starts off with the monster trio. First we get Sanji, then we get Zoro, and then we get Luffy. And so we start off with and he's using his Kizaru / Pacifista lasers on Sanji. I mean, even the explosion looks the same. Sanji hasn't gone raid suit, which is really good. I kind of wonder what Queen is going to need to do to push Sanji to use the raid suit. Then we go to Zoro, and I think you can still see Chopper there. He's just very tiny. He should still be on Tristan's hands. Tristan should still be holding him. And this scene kind of makes it sound as if Zoro is afraid of needles, which is a phobia that I don't think we knew he had. But regardless, it's a very normal phobia. It's a very common fear. We go to the Polar Tang, which is no longer submerged, so it just seems like they picked up Luffy and they decided to rise. I thought Luffy looked really weirdly drawn in the middle of that page. He looks like some kind of possessed zombie. And so of course something that is very in character for Luffy is that he views food as medicine. Like, we've seen this over and over again throughout the series. Like when Nami got sick, before the crew got to Drum Island, back in Thriller Bark, when Zoro took his pain, Luffy was just like, just give Zoro his favorite drink, you know? This is what he likes, just give him some sake, and he'll be fine. And then of course back in Impel Down, when he was recuperating from Magellan's poison, he was just asking for food. So it's the same thing here, just bring me some meat and I'll be fine, so I could get ready to fight Kaido again. There was also this collaboration between One Piece and Where is Waldo, and so we got this full page packed with characters in Onigashima, but in the style of Where is Waldo. If you don't want to know where Waldo is, you can just mute me for a couple of seconds or just fast forward this section, but essentially Waldo is right there at the bottom, right above Sulong Wanda and Sulong Carrot. There were a bunch of other Easter egg characters in that page as well. Like, I saw like a Gaimon and a Panda Man. Also, Sanji's comment about Franky being interested in Queen's tech / Vegapunk's tech kind of seems to foreshadow the final page of the Franky vs Sasaki fight in this chapter, but it also reminded me of that statement by Franky at the end of Zou, where he says that he's gonna make a weapon to defeat Kaido. And then also Zoro saying that he's gonna gather up all of the samurai from Wano. And so of course we know that both of those things happened in chapter 900, and no, it didn't. So I really do wonder if either of those things are even gonna happen now. Or maybe Franky's comment was referring to him eventually building Pluton. And maybe he'll incorporate Queen's beam technology into his future building of it. We cut to the section of Onigashima where Franky is fighting Sasaki, and we see the Stag Beetle Gifter as well as the Porcupine Gifter attacking some of the Beast Pirates. And this is the exact same format that we got a couple of chapters ago, where Poker was essentially telling Jinbei, you just focus on who's who, and we'll take care of the fodder. And then Sasaki, I don't know if he realizes that he's doing this, but he's actually complimenting Franky's Wappo metal, because that's what the Franky Shogun is made out of. Sasaki goes hybrid, and this is where things start getting a little bit silly. I definitely expected his hybrid form to look a little bit more intimidating, but instead he has kind of a beer belly. He still has like the V for victory scar that Franky left on him back in chapter 1004. And then his neck, it just looks like like a Jabba the Hutt type of neck. I also think this chapter is sort of a callback to chapter 996, because back then there was a moment where it looked like Yamato and Sasaki were about to fight, and so we got two teases back in that chapter. The first one is that Sasaki was drawing out his sword, right? He was about to unsheath it, and then Yamato was growing fangs and growling. And so the two things that got teased back in chapter 996 actually get revealed in this chapter. We get to find out how Sasaki's sword actually works, and we also get to see Yamato's transformation. And so I also think that what this does is that it solidifies the Zoro versus King agenda. Because if you think about it, Who's Who turned out not to be a swordsman. His blade turned out to be more of a dagger than a sword. So he's not a swordsman. And then Sasaki's sword, from what we see in this chapter, is more of a drill than anything else. Which means that King is technically the only swordsman that is part of the upper ranks of Kaido's crew. And so it's going to be up to Zoro to defeat King, because that's his goal. World's greatest swordsman. World's strongest swordsman. So if he doesn't fight a swordsman here after getting cured, what is he going to do? So Sasaki's frills start spinning, and he starts elevating himself up into the sky like he's a helicopter. Like I said, this is where things start getting a tad bit ridiculous, but you know, it's within the realm of One Piece ridiculousness, so it's all good. Now, something that I found out, which I didn't know before this chapter, was that scientists have actually debated and disagreed on what the purpose of the Triceratop frills has been for years. Like, nobody can fully explain why Triceratops had frills on the back of their head. What was their purpose? There have been theories about how maybe the frills were important during mating rituals and they were used to attract mates. Other theories say that they were basically there for body temperature regulation. But the point is that nobody knows for sure. So I think what happened is that Oda found out about it and he was like, well, since nobody can give me an explanation why Triceratops had frills, I'm just going to make up my own explanation and say that they used them to fly like helicopters. So Sasaki uses his to attack the armored squad gifters, including Stag Beetle Guy and Mr. Porcupine. The way Sasaki is using the spin is more like a circular saw, so Franky takes out the Franken sword from the Shogun and uses it to change the direction of the spin, which causes Sasaki to actually land. After that, Sasaki activates the spin of his frills again, only this time he uses them to propel himself backwards so that he can put enough distance between himself and Franky and gain enough momentum to charge in with an attack. I feel like that charge would have been a great opportunity for Sasaki to activate his armament haki if he had it, but so far the only members of the Tobiropo that are confirmed to be able to use haki are Ulti, Who's Who, and Drake. Despite that though, Franky's shield is not enough to block the attack, so Sasaki bypasses the block, he hits Franky on the left shoulder, the shoulder is full of explosive ammo, and so the shoulder blows up. Now because Sasaki's charging in head first, Franky uses this to his advantage to lock Sasaki in a hold and perform a general. Now, I do have to give credit where credit is due, because before his fight with Senor Pink, Franky never used suplex moves. So each time you see Franky perform a suplex, that's essentially a shout out to Senor Pink. Because during their fight, Senor Pink was essentially spamming suplex moves. So that's where Franky learned the technique. So thank you, Senor Pink. Come to think about it, Senor Pink also had like a beer belly, similar to hybrid form Sasaki. So maybe it's a pattern now that Franky has to fight people with beer bellies. And speaking of that, after the suplex, Franky makes a note about Sasaki's weak spot being his stomach. And so I think it's very in tune with Franky's character to notice this weak spot, especially because he has a weak spot of his own when it comes to his body, and that's his back. So just like Sasaki's armor doesn't cover his belly, Franky's armor doesn't cover his back, because that's the only place that Franky wasn't able to modify and fortify because he couldn't reach it. So Franky goes for another V for victory on the Triceratops, but Sasaki activates his helicopter mode and dodges it. Then he comes back down and the two start sparring. Franky then makes a comment about how he's not really good with swords, further highlighting Zoro's role in the crew. Sasaki breaks his sword and then Franky's like, alright, screw this isn't working, so he runs off and starts charging up his General Cannon, which is basically this blast of compressed air that he used against Buffalo and Baby 5 back in Punk Hazard. Sasaki pretty much takes the attack, then he makes a comment about not underestimating the Tobiropo, which, by the way, I find it funny that another name for the Tobiropo is the Flying Six, and from what we've seen thus far, at least two of the members can actually fly. Who's Who can fly using Geppo, and then Sasaki turns into a helicopter. Sasaki then prepares his ultimate attack while in the air and comes shooting down like a meteor. Franky uses the impact as an opportunity to eject himself from the general, and I think there's two things that Franky learned during this fight that he's applying here in this final move. The first one is that the Triceratops' weak spot is his belly, so he's going to be aiming for that. But then the other thing is that if we go back to the suplex move, after Sasaki lands his attack, there is a window of time where he's wide open. And that's why Franky was able to put him in a hold to perform the suplex. It's the same thing here. After Sasaki comes down on the general, Franky takes this opportunity, this opening, to get out of there, aim for the stomach, and counter beautifully with the radical beam. Sasaki's eyes go white after the attack, so we're not sure if we're going to see more of him. The scene is pretty much almost identical to the last chapter where Jinbei quote-unquote finished off Who's Who. Will they be back? Will these top two Tobiroppo come back? We're not sure yet, but regardless, this has been a great lesson in fighting adaptability from the least favorite Straw Hat according to the worldwide poll. I forgot to mention that a big source of inspiration behind this chapter could also be a pretty famous statue in Cincinnati, Ohio called the Triceracopter. It's basically this Triceratops built out of this old Vietnam War helicopter. The sculptor who created it was called Patricia Rennick, and she's already passed away, sadly. But before she passed away, she also created herself as a dinosaur statue. She basically sculpted herself as this Triceratops human beast hybrid sitting in a chair. And so I think it's so cool that if this is the inspiration for this chapter, it's kind of cool how like this is the chapter where Sasaki goes hybrid form, so man beast form. So that's a reference to that statue, but it's also a reference to the Triceracopter. She also created another statue called the Stegowagon Volksaurus, which is basically a fusion between a Stegosaurus and a Volkswagen. And so yeah, it just seems kind of like the type of art that Oda would really like. That's like his style. I just find it kind of cool how like Patricia Rennick from the University of Cincinnati is sort of immortalized now because of her statues and because of this One Piece chapter. We go up to the roof of the skull and we find out that Yamato has a mythical type Zoan devil fruit. Kaido essentially confirms this by saying that he went to a lot of trouble to get it, and mythical type Zoans are the rarest types of fruits there are. Similar to Luffy, Yamato says that the eating of the fruit wasn't intentional, that she just ate it because she was hungry and wasn't looking for anything special. Now I know the main question that this chapter leaves us with is, what is Yamato's devil fruit? However, I think the question that was more interesting to me was, what is the added effect of Yamato's devil fruit? Because every time we've seen a mythical type Zoan, they have an added ability. And the reason why I really want to know what Yamato's added ability is from her mythical type Zoan fruit is because, I mean, she's been 1v1ing Kaido for a minute. They're both in their strongest form. They're both in hybrid form, so I wonder if Yamato's mythical type devil fruit is giving her an added ability that is allowing her to last this long against Kaido. In addition to Yamato saying, obviously, that she's tried to fight Kaido in the past on multiple occasions, and so she's kind of had some training when it comes to dealing with Dad. I also think that Oda showing Yamato in hybrid form is intentional because that way he has a better shot at hiding what Yamato's devil fruit actually is. So there are a bunch of options, right, in terms of what the devil fruit is. My first thought went to Fennekin, just some type of mythological fiery fox of sorts. I also thought about Inari, which is basically like the guardian that we see outside of like Japanese temples. But then we also already kind of have a mythological fox devil fruit, which is Katarina Devon's devil fruit. She has the Kyuubi's power, so like remember, mythical type Zoans are the rarest types of devil fruit there is. So for there to be two foxes, it just seems kind of like not too rare. I also thought about it being the Kirin or the Kilin from Chinese and Japanese mythology, which we've seen in other media as well. The thing about the Kirin though is that they typically have scales on their skin, and so far I'm not seeing any scales on Yamato. Also, the Kirin like sometimes is called the sort of like Eastern equivalent of the unicorn, and so they're sometimes depicted as having one horn on their heads, and in this chapter we can clearly see that Yamato has two. Kirins are also supposed to be like this mythological version of a giraffe. So the Kirin is a good guess, but there are other mythological Japanese creatures that we have to consider here. For example, there's this other creature called Raiju, or the Raiju. It says here that its body is composed of lightning, typically taking the form of a white and blue dog or wolf. I feel like it has to be either a mythical dog, a wolf, or a cat. By the way, just as a side note here, I think that the way that Yamato is presented in this chapter is pretty much identical to the way that Carrot was presented back when she went Sulong for the very first time. And so I think like Oda is saying like, hey, I know you guys wanted Carrot to join the crew, but guess what? Yamato is also a furry animal. It's like he's saying, just forget about Carrot, please. Substitute her with Yamato in your mind, because that's what I want to do. I also thought about Yamato being Fenrir, the giant wolf from Norse mythology, also the son of Loki. If it's Norse mythology related, that would appear to connect this devil fruit power to Elbaf, which is where we're going to next. Also, Kaido used an attack called Ragnarok, which is Norse mythology related. But the thing that really nudged me in the direction of it possibly being Fenrir is that according to the mythology, the gods were fearful about Fenrir's strength. They were like, yeah, this wolf is really strong. And so what they ended up doing was that they chained Fenrir with a magical chain. And so in this final scene, there's talk about Yamato being really strong and being chained or being cuffed. So that reminded me of Fenrir. But anyway, like the whole line about the cuffs not being the only reason for why Yamato was staying in Onigashima, I think that's kind of Oda's way of possibly justifying the fact that maybe Yamato has advanced hockey, maybe she has advanced armament hockey, or maybe she has conqueror's hockey or something like that. And so that way, if it gets revealed that she has some type of advanced hockey, fans won't be like, well, if that's the case, why didn't she just remove her own cuffs instead of waiting for Luffy to do it? And, you know, she's giving you this reason that it was not just about the cuffs. Actually, I think it's already been confirmed that Yamato, at the very least, has advanced armament hockey, or Rio, because at one point I remember that when she saved Momonosuke, like she kind of fell down a hole and she took out one of the numbers by sending out this hockey blast arrow thing. She just shot it right out of her club and took out that number. So just in case we later find out that Yamato also has internal destruction armament hockey or is able to weaponize conqueror's hockey, now Oda has an excuse for as to why Yamato didn't break her own cuffs. Also, I think that the last bit of dialogue in this chapter kind of ends up throwing a wrench at the Yamato male pronoun side of the debate, because Yamato says this to Kaido: if I don't fight for the sake of this country, then I can't call myself Odin. So the way Yamato views it is that being called Odin is something that she has to earn, right? And so if Odin in this scene is synonymous with man or male, that doesn't really work, because I think one of the things that we can all agree on, no matter what side of the debate we're on, whether it's the left or the right, one of the things that we can all agree on is that gender isn't something that you earn. I remember when Yamato first met Momonosuke, right? And she was like, oh, you're my son, I'm your father. And Momonosuke freaked out. I remember reading that and being like, oh, this clearly goes beyond like a gender identity thing. Because once you start calling yourself somebody else's dad when you're clearly not, like, that's something else. That goes above and beyond any kind of gender identity aspect to Yamato's character. Like, you're calling yourself somebody's parent when you clearly are not their parent. There's another moment where she rescues Momonosuke and she says, I told you that I was Odin before. I used your father's name, but I also have another name. My other name is Yamato. I think that's what she says. So in her mind, then, there is a distinction between this Odin persona and, like, Yamato. In chapter 999, the Spade Pirates, Ace's crew, or should I say Oda, actually calls Yamato Kaido's daughter, right? If you go to that chapter, you'll see it in the page. It says, like, is that Kaido's daughter? And granted, Yamato does get upset in that scene when she's referred to as Kaido's daughter, but then she also gets upset when Luffy calls her Yama-O or Yama-Guy. She actually corrects him and says it's not Yama-O, it's Yamato. So there's still a lot of ambiguity. I think Oda will eventually clear things up in regards to Yamato's character. And the thing is that I do think that Oda has written himself into a corner, because no matter what the answer is, when he finally decides to stop beating around the bush and actually give us an answer, like, there's a bunch of people that are not going to like the answer, no matter what the answer is. That's just how polarized society is about these things right now. Another thing here is that maybe Oda is using this to increase our tolerance level for the ambiguous. Maybe he'll never give us an answer, and that's kind of the point. You know, I wouldn't put it past Oda for him to do that. But yeah, I just had to bring this up because in the text she does say that Odin, being called Odin, is something that she has to earn. When, in fact, again, one of the things that both sides can agree on is that gender isn't something that you earn. It's not a prize to be won. What a huge tangent I just went on. Anyway, back to the devil fruit talk. I know that there's this other character from a video game called Okami that people have mentioned. It's basically like this wolf, this fire wolf of sorts. Well, it's really like a version of Amaterasu. Amaterasu is the sun goddess, right? And so I think in the video game, she decides to go to Earth, and so she takes the form of a wolf in the video game. Now, I'm pretty sure that that's a copyrighted property, so I'm not really sure if Oda would necessarily cross that line for inspiration on Yamato's devil fruit power, but I do think that if it is like a version of Amaterasu, I think that would be really cool, especially because we just got the reveal of this legendary sun god Nika figure, which is, you know, the sun warrior. So Amaterasu, sun warrior. It'll be like the goddess of the sun, Amaterasu, with the sun god warrior. Again, I think it has to be either a cat, a wolf, or a dog. And so I'm going to end talking about the cat options. So basically there's this creature in Japanese folklore called the bakeneko. The bakeneko are essentially yokai, so they're like these spirits, these ghosts of dead cats, or like they're like these phantom cats that are very vengeful, and they come back as spirits to try and kill their owners. Now there's also an evolved version of the bakeneko that's called the nekomata. Basically it says here that the nekomata are far more powerful and evil than the bakeneko. It says once a bakeneko gets an extremely long tail and reaches an old age, the tail will split in two and a nekomata is born. They start to walk on two legs and speak the human tongue, and their powers include creating fire and controlling the dead. And I do want to mention that if you notice, like Yamato's tails aren't really shown in the final scene, like they're cut off from the panel, but it kind of does look like she has two tails, or at least it looks like she has more than one tail. So I wonder if like it was intentional that Oda hid the amount of tails that Yamato has, because then we would figure it out. But yeah, it could be that she's one of these demon yokai cats. Let me know what you think Yamato's devil fruit power is. If I didn't cover the option that you were thinking about, just leave it in the comment section and maybe we can all learn from it. That's it for me, guys. I thought the chapter was good. The chapter was good. Again, very similar structure-wise to the Jinbei versus Who's Who fight. For pacing purposes, I think it would have been a better idea to include Yamato's devil fruit reveal at the end of chapter 1016, because I think that chapter needed more weight to it, and so I think this reveal would have helped it. And then maybe we would have gotten another reveal in this chapter, but at least we got it. You know, we're moving forward. Good chapter of One Piece. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Take care, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.